Hey you, come a little bit closer. I want to ask you a question. Do you want to grow your relationship with God? Do you really want to grow that relationship, evolve it, and let it blossom? Well, if you do, then this is the video for you. We have a tendency in our culture to overinflate our relationship with God. We don't want to be judged by all of those people around us, right? We want everybody to think about our relationship with God as though us and God are like this all the time. But the truth of the matter is, if you're anything like me, that's not the case. Your relationship with God is a relationship just like any other relationship. It has highs and lows. Your connection varies from moment to moment, from breath to breath. Now, God is steadfast. God is committed to us in a way that we can't comprehend. But at the end of the day, we're humans, right? We're just flesh and bones, and we have feelings and thoughts and doubts and fear, and all of those things creep in, and they serve to influence our relationship with God. They serve to change the way that we move, to change the way that we love, and to change our hearts in a really magical way. But sometimes that way is destructive. Sometimes we have moments in our lives where we're pulled further and further away from God. In the valleys of that relationship, where do we turn? Well, we turn everywhere except for God. But God remains steadfast even in those valleys, that God might ultimately draw us up the mountain, that we might stand at the mountain top and look over all of creation and be reminded of the goodness of God. Now, what is the most important piece of your relationship with God? Our culture, everything around us would tell us that it's worship, right? We value worship more than any other thing. We play the worship music in our favorite hymns. We look forward to joining in community on Sundays, that we might gather and that we might have this raucous praise, right? The largest churches in the country are churches that are more concert than solemn, reverent worship services, right? And it's okay to play awesome music. It's okay to dance around, to shout and proclaim the glory of God. I mean, we are supposed to be praising God, right? But if you think that that's the most important piece of your relationship, I'm afraid you're wrong. The most important piece of your relationship is the connection between you and God. That is an individual dialogue between you and the Most High. And the only way that you can begin that dialogue is to submit, to surrender, and to open yourself to God in prayer. We take for granted this idea that God knows our thoughts and our feelings, that God knows our hearts in such an intimate way. And we think that because God knows us so intimately, that we don't have to communicate with God, that we don't have to have the dialogue with God, that God just knows and that's good enough. But my friends, that is not good enough. It's important that we communicate with God, because our communication, our vulnerability, our openness is what develops our relationship with God. God's side of our relationship is good. God loves us in an unconditional way that we can't even wrap our brains around. No matter how far you've fallen off the beaten path, no matter which direction you've decided to go, no matter how long it's been since you've praised or prayed, God still loves you. God still thinks you are a wonderful and beautiful creation. God still chooses you. We are the ones that wander off. We are the ones that are fickle in our understanding of God. We are the ones that aren't sure and aren't convinced that we should fully invest in the relationship. So it's our responsibility to be open, to be vulnerable, and to begin that dialogue with God. So here's what I want you to do. If you're truly wanting to grow your relationship with God, I want you to carve out some space in your life. I want you to be intentional about carving the space, about scheduling the time. I want you to turn your phone off or put it on Do Not Disturb and put it across the room from you. And I want you to get comfortable. I want you to get in a comfortable place, in a comfortable room, to get the lights where you need them, to get the thermostat in a comfortable place. And I want you to open with this idea. God, I feel you. I see you. And I thank you. And as you say those words, I want you to commit yourself. I want you to commit yourself fully to opening up to God. That God might use you. That God might speak to you. And that God might hear all of those prayers on your hearts. Because we don't acknowledge half of the things that we're carrying on our back. Half of the things that are weighing us down, those burdens, those fears, those doubts. And God knows them. God knows them. But in order for us to know ourselves the way that God knows us, we must be willing to open ourselves up, to be vulnerable, to share those things with God and come to a true awareness of what God created us to be. My friend, I don't know what you're going through in this life. I can guarantee that you've been through some things, that you've had loss and turmoil, that the plans that you made haven't always turned out the way that you thought that they would, that your hopes and your dreams may still be alive, but they aren't as strong and as vibrant as they were at one point. And when you faced that adversity in your life, you may have strayed away from God. You may have turned your back on the God that loves you, but I promise you this, God has never, ever turned a back on you. God has walked with you through those valleys. God has climbed through the muck and climbed over walls and barriers that have stood in your way and been right there beside you to shepherd you and guide you and shelter you from the rain. And in those moments when you've doubted, in those moments when you've told yourself that God isn't there, that God doesn't love you, that God isn't real, God has stood right there beside you, pouring love, compassion, and most importantly, grace over His beloved, that you might take another breath and another step, and that you might blossom into the person that you were created to be, beautifully and wonderfully made. God knows your heart, my friend. And God wants you to grow and evolve and to blossom into this person that you're supposed to be. But how much easier would this evolution be if you just leaned into those arms of God? If you just trusted God to lead you, to hold you, if you were just vulnerable enough to begin the dialogue with the Most High, where would you be, my friend? Thanks so much for tuning in, friends. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I hope to see you back soon.
These are your thoughts, dictator. This is the hope of God set free. These are your thoughts.